Okay, let's just get to it. Tonight we're talking about Frankenstein. And I'm not talking about the Universal Classic. We'll get to that one later. This is the Frankenstein that was done in 1994, directed by Kenneth Branagh, starring Kenneth Branagh, Robert De Niro, Helena Bonham Carter, Sir Ian Holm. John Cleese is in it. I did not realize that was John Cleese until recently. This is the one Frankenstein movie that I personally have watched that was closest to Mary Shelley's book. Y'all, they made us read it in high school. I know that there are a lot of you people in the U.S., possibly Canada as well, maybe the UK, where this is required reading because it's like supposed to be this amazing literature. Great story. The fact that it was written by basically a young woman at the time was amazing. She's not that bad of a writer. It's just that it's dated. And when they make you read that stuff when you're anywhere from, depending on where you're at, 15 to 18, it's not what's going on in your head. You're not really into it unless you're, into Gothic literature or Universal Monsters and all that. So at the time I read it, excuse me, I had to hiccup. I didn't appreciate it. I did go back and reread it again, probably 5 years after high school. And I've been out of high school for a very long time. And like I said, it's a good story. The writing's kind of dated. But if you can get past that, yes, I would recommend that book. I would recommend this as a companion to that book. But here's the caveat. The book reads as a piece of serious drama. Kenneth Branagh, from what few movies of his that I have seen that he has directed, he leans more towards melodrama. Big sweeping acting performances that are sometimes almost comical. I hate to say it because I loved Thor. And I think he did a Shakespearean play adaptation as a film that I absolutely thought was fun too. This one, it almost feels like it drags the story down a little bit because it makes it feel a bit comical at times. But for those of you that were not forced to read this in high school or chose to read it because you want to, expose yourself to fine literature, this is the classic story of man creates monster. Although I hesitate to call it a monster. We shall try to remember to call it creature from now on. And Frankenstein is the name of the guy who created him, not the creature. His name is Victor Frankenstein. We start this movie with the Frankenstein family being a family. Mom's dancing with young son Victor. Father brings home an orphan who will be their sister. Her name is Elizabeth. We skip forward to I'm assuming it's supposed to be an older teenager, early 20-something Victor. It's adult Kenneth Branagh. Older Elizabeth. Mother's pregnant with another son. Father Frankenstein, the Baron, is also a doctor. I should mention this. Son's obsessed with experimenting and all this, and we get into it. You find out that he and Elizabeth have fallen in love, even though they're technically adopted siblings. Lo and behold, in European upper crust society, that might have been more common than we think. I digress. So we get to the point where the mom goes to give birth and the baby's twisted in the wrong position. Baron Frankenstein, the father, has to make a decision to save the baby or the wife. They save the baby because that's what the wife insists on. And this begins young Victor Frankenstein's obsession with bringing the dead back to life. He wants to either put off death. These are all noble causes. You don't want to lose loved ones to things like, childbirth mistakes or cholera, which cholera comes up later. You don't want to lose someone to this. And this is taking place in that late Georgian period where they were just starting to really explore early modern medicine. And if you are a fan of early modern medicine, this will get your juices flowing. I don't know how historically accurate it is. It's very steampunk in feel. But, you might look at that and go, oh, that is so cool. Definitely makes me want to look into early modern medicine. Again, I'm sorry, this is a tangent. He goes to med school. They think he's a quack because not only does he want to study the new stuff, but he wants to study Agrippa, and some of the other ancient philosopher doctors. And no, we're only studying known science and blah, blah, blah. One of his instructors had attempted to reanimate life. This is the character played by John Cleese. Oh my god, I did not realize that was John Cleese when I watched this the first time. I'm used to John Cleese, Monty Python, Fawlty Towers, the Ministry of Silly Walks, that kind of thing. This character is so serious and so dramatic. I was surprised when I'm that's John Cleese. Powerhouse performance by him, even though it's very short because this character does end up passing away. And this is what puts Victor over the edge. This is what makes him go and create this creature. There's a cholera epidemic getting started in the city. All the doctors are out trying to vaccinate. And in the early days of vaccinations, if you thought the panini was bad when that jab started coming out, think a couple hundred more years before that when people thought all that stuff was witchcraft and poison and yeah. And that's all I'm going to say about that. So Victor gets his hands on this instructor's journals, figures out how to do it, takes the murderer's body, pieces other pieces together because the murderer was missing a leg. The murderer is also played by Robert De Niro, who played the creature. And lo and behold, Victor Frankenstein creates life. And it is a weird, I'm almost going to say homoerotic moment when the creature, Frankenstein is trying to get his creature, trying to help him stand. Creature's completely naked. Warning, you do see some, I'm trying to think of a respectful word for it that doesn't sound super clinical, but the creature's naked. You see bare booty and you see, just for a couple of seconds here and there, the little monster, the little creature, the woo, the pee-pee. I'm trying to not sound like a 2-year-old, but I'm also not trying to sound like a clinical nurse either. But they're sliding around because fluid and everybody's and Kenneth Branagh's got his shirt off, surprisingly enough, ripped as hell. That shocked the hell out of me. And I was getting kind of tones of some homoeroticism. It may not have been intended, but that, and I don't normally jump to that, but I saw that. That's how I saw that. I'm really going off on a tangent here. I apologize. He thinks he killed the creature. Turns out the creature is not dead. They altercate. Creature flees off into the night with Victor's coat, which has his journal in it. Victor goes back to Geneva, which is where he's from, and he brings his friend Henry, who has finally become a doctor. He intends to marry Elizabeth, which I didn't mention. Elizabeth is played by Helena Bonham Carter. She and Kenneth Branagh may have been dating at this point. I don't know. I don't know the whole timeline of Branagh and Emma Thompson being together and then him cheating on Emma Thompson with Helena Bonham Carter. That's gossip. I try not to stick my nose too far in that, but it has been brought up in interviews, and I don't know what the timeline is for this. Because they do seem very at ease in the kissy face lovey stuff. So, almost too at ease. Again, I'm digressing. I apologize. I'll go back. So, they arrive back in Geneva, intend to get married, and the whole time that this is happening, the creature has wandered off into the wilderness. He has escaped the city because it was under quarantine due to the cholera. He hid in a cart of bodies. Genius. He finds a farmhouse with a family that has a blind grandfather, a little girl, and a mother and a father. And a bunch of stuff happens there. He eventually learns or remembers. I don't know if it was actually learning. He says there's a speech later where the creature says, was it learning or was it remembering? Either way, by the end of all this, he has figured out how to speak and how to read. He reads Victor's journal, and he scared the family. They ran off. And he vows revenge on Victor Frankenstein, and that is exactly what he does. He goes to Geneva. He kills the little brother. He ends up killing the father. He requests that Frankenstein make him a companion, which Frankenstein almost agrees to, and then just says, no, I'm going back on my promise, which in turn causes him to kill Elizabeth. So Frankenstein, in a moment of madness, takes Elizabeth and another female dead body, mashes them together, and reanimates his bride. So this is where we start getting into Bride of Frankenstein territory, but Universal took some notes and made him far superior end story for that than what I think Mary Shelley intended. But again, we'll get into Universal monsters eventually. I have a passion for Universal monsters, and Frankenstein is one of my favorites. Because I'll just stop. We'll go on that later. So all in all, by the end of this, we end up almost to the North Pole on a ship that's stuck in frozen ice, where Frankenstein is taken in by the crew. He dies. The creature finds them, and the creature and Victor are dead by the end. I wanted to be sympathetic. I really did. But De Niro's just too De Niro here. I mean, don't get me wrong, De Niro is a powerful actor. Taxi Driver is an amazing example of this. But that's all I could keep thinking was, you talking to me? Or some of his other, like, gangstery type roles. I can't buy him as the creature as much as I want to. There's a lack of sympathy there, which, I mean, maybe that's something that's defective on my part. But I just felt like he didn't have my sympathy. Victor Frankenstein, I didn't sympathize with his... It's like I wanted to. But Branagh made everything so grandiose and melodramatic and oversweeping. And it's just like, I bought the love story. I bought that Victor was crazy and passionate about his work, but I didn't sympathize with him. And I think that's a big lacking in this in this film, is it's lacking sympathy. Or it's lacking something that generates sympathy in me as a viewer. Again, this could be a defect on my part. I don't know, but these are just my thoughts. Would I recommend this film? Yes. I own it on DVD. That's how long I've had it. It came in a 2-pack with that and Bram Stoker's Dracula, because Francis Ford Coppola actually did help produce this. He was one of the producers through American Zoetrope, his film company. But it did not perform as well and did not get as many good reviews as Dracula did. I think Dracula is the superior film. I think the casting was better. I think the writing was better. There was definitely more sympathy there. But, I mean, if you want to watch them as a double feature, I highly recommend it. But I would watch Frankenstein first and then watch Dracula, because you always want to end on a bang. And that's how I would do this. Notes about production and things. The art direction was good. I felt like some of the stages and, like, homes that they filmed in were just too big. I was looking more at how only so many people filled the foreground, and then there was this huge background, than I did at what was actually going on in the action in the foreground. The costuming was good. I'm not usually a huge fan of that late Georgian period. And when I say Georgian period, and I may be wrong here, this is not my favorite historical era for fashion. It's that 1700s, like the latter half where the King Georges were king. That's why they call it Georgian. Um, pre, what's the Bridgerton period? Regency period, pre-Regency period. So we still have the big wide pannier dresses and the low cut with the boobs smushed, and dudes wearing pants that are way tight with high riding boots and frock coats. It was done well. The hair bothered me. I made a comment to my husband about this one. I'm like, why does the hair bother me? And he goes, because it's so frizzy. And the more I looked at it, I think it was more than just the hair was so frizzy, and it was. But that was part of the style, was the frizzy wig thing. I think it's because they were trying to pass off 90s overgrown hair, men's haircuts with extensions in them pulled back into a ponytail as a whole head of real hair. Just something about it didn't blend. And me, as someone who really loves makeup and costuming, that didn't sit well with me, especially someone who really loves the historical aspect of makeup and costuming. The music was wonderful. It was big where it needed to be. It's not memorable, though. I wouldn't buy this soundtrack just to listen to it, because sometimes I do that, especially one that has more of a classical soundtrack. Like, I would listen to the Dracula soundtrack cleaning my bathroom, or reading a book, or folding laundry. I would not do that with Frankenstein. Again, not a bad movie, not the greatest movie, but very faithful to the story, so kudos for that. Very Kenneth Branagh. That's all I'm gonna say. Almost feels like Gilderoy Lockhart directed himself at times, and I know that's probably a very unfair observation. I was only 14 when this movie came out, so I was probably 13 when it was filmed, and I wasn't there, and I didn't know what personal politics were going on and what, office politics were going on. So I really shouldn't speculate. But isn't that the fun part sometimes? So on that note, that was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, directed and starring Kenneth Branagh. Pardon me, got a dry throat. I hesitate to do a stars review, 4 out of 5 stars, 3 out of 5 stars, but I'll say it's a Midland to better than Midland movie. When I say Midland, I mean in the middle. So it's a middle to better than middle movie. Rewatchable, entertaining, but it's not the first movie I'm going to reach for. Won't be the last one either. That'll be some of the other stuff I have watched for these reviews coming up. So on that note, have a good night, my creeplings.